The work is outwardly unimportant. When we do the inner work, then the outer work will become a reflection of our willingness to do our own work with ourselves. And if you're not convinced yet, you need one more? I know you're convinced already. How can anyone ignore this? You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who would persecute you, so that you may be the children of your Father in heaven. For he maketh his sun to rise on the evil and on the good, and sends his rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. If you just love those who love you, what are you doing that's different from anyone else? I have no problem loving my children, loving my grandchildren, loving you who are in this room. If you want to really get awake, love the enemy outside of you. In that wonderful moment in Avatar, where that being looks at that other being, the beings we like, that represent our good side, our holy side, and says, I see you. I see you. I see you. That's easy to do with the people who you already love and consider your family. Your family, friends and family, right? But how about your enemies?
Right.
To even look at your enemies and say, I see you. You're not fooling me by this appearance. And what I make strong in you will become stronger inside of me. So this inner work is where we're called upon to awaken. Jack, in his wonderful book called The Path with Heart, not The Wise Heart, but The Path with Heart, says it just so beautifully this way. When we step out of the battle, we see anew, with eyes unclouded by longing. The unawakened mind tends to make war against the way things are. To follow a path with heart and awaken the avatar within, we must understand the whole process of making war, within and without, and how it begins and how it ends. Without understanding, we can easily become frightened by life's fleeting changes, the inevitable losses, disappointments, the insecurities of our aging and our death. Misunderstanding leads us to fight against life, running from pain or grasping its security and pleasures, which by their very nature can truly never satisfy. And then Ajahn Chah says it this way, and this goes right to the heart of our inner practice with ourselves. We human beings are constantly in battle, at war, to escape the fact of being so limited by so many circumstances we cannot seem to control. But instead of escaping, what do? We continue to create suffering, waging war with what is good, waging war with what is evil, waging war with what is too small, waging war with what is too long, waging war with what's right, waging war with what's wrong. Courageously, we carry on the battle, and we wonder why nothing changes. Year after year after year, we keep doing this to who?
Ourselves.
To ourselves. Mahatma Gandhi said, I have 3 enemies. One enemy, which is the one I can work with the easiest, is the British Empire. The second enemy that I work with is the Indian people. They're a little bit more tough to deal with. But this one called Mahatma K. Gandhi, with him I seem to have very little influence. You get it? It's you. It's us. It's you and me in this room who continually wage battle to fight the good fight. We look in the mirror and we don't like what we see. We're going to go at war and make a better body. I'm going to have better finances, tote that barge, lift that bale, and continue to struggle over and over and over again with the same things that imprisoned us last year become the same things that keep us imprisoned this year. The path to awaken involves us taking a different look and a different approach. In one more story, Jack says this in the book about a friend who came to a meditation retreat, a young man who had a deep distrust for authority. He had rebelled in his family, understandably. He had an abusive mother. He rebelled in school and dropped out to join the counterculture. He found a girlfriend who he wanted to love, but she controlled him. Then he went to India and Thailand to find his freedom. After an initial positive experience in meditation, he signed up for a period of deep practice in a monastery. He decided to practice very strictly. and make himself clear, you know this one, pure and peaceful. However, after a short time, he found himself in conflict again. The daily chores didn't leave him enough time to meditate properly. The sound of visitors and an occasional car were disturbing his meditation. The teacher, he felt, wasn't giving enough advice, and due to this, his meditation was weak and his mind wouldn't stop. He struggled to quiet himself and resolved to do it his own way, but ended up just fighting with himself. Finally, the teacher, I love this, came to him at the end of a group meditation and said, "You're struggling with everything. How is it that the food bothers you? How is it that the sounds and the chores bother you? Even your mind bothers you. Doesn't this seem odd? What I want to know is when you hear a car come by, does it really come in and bother you, or are you going out and bothering it? Who is bothering whom? Who is bothering whom? This is the work. Who is bothering whom? This is us doing it to ourselves over and over and over again. And of course he laughed when he heard this, because we always come back to the truth that the genuine spiritual path is about engaging and being present with our own internal struggle with ourselves. And when we're willing to bring awareness, even to the most simplest of things, our practice deepens, and we begin to change, and we become a healing force for good on the planet, rather than just blowing up more outer enemies that just find another one, another one, another one. Do you remember the Forrest Gump movie where Forrest Gump saves the sergeant? Do you remember that part in the movie from being killed and he ends up losing his legs, the sergeant does? And there's this one amazing scene where Forrest comes in and the sergeant, who looks up, grabs him by the throat to strangle him and says, "How dare you take my right to die in battle away from me? Well, everybody in my family has died in battle." And then for the next 10 minutes, there's a series of people piling on top of each other who have been killed in battle. Do you hear the battle cry of insanity in that? We keep doing it to ourselves. Until we deal with that struggle in us, it'll just keep projecting outside of us. The wake-up call is not one person getting this awakening, but us individually and collectively doing it in all the things we're struggling with in our life. So we come back to our daily practice. That's where it ends, right? And begins. It's Monday morning, right before we left, and some of you heard this Wednesday night, but it fits too good not to share it here. And my daughter was at the first service, so I had to tickle her with this memory. And I'm sitting in my seat, and it's 6 o'clock in the morning. You know that flight that goes from Wilmington to Atlanta? It's real early in the morning. So I take my seat, and I had that usual lousy night's sleep before you leave, because you're getting all the details ready. Did the alarm go? Did it go? Did it go? 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, you're awake. So I'm taking my seat, and Maureen's next to me. We're going on this 12-hour journey on the airplane. And I sit down, and I lean back, and all of a sudden I just feel this pushing behind me. There's this person behind me, and they're pushing the back of my seat. And that reminded me of my daughter, Maura, who constantly did the same thing to me all the time. In fact, she was giggling and laughing. In fact, Maura was actually doing it to me while I was sitting here. She didn't even know I was giving this particular lesson, and was doing that. And so here this was, this annoying thing bothering me, behind me. And Maureen looks at me and she says to me, "Let's just change seats, okay? Just change seats. It's just an hour. We'll change seats." I said, "I'll deal with this myself, okay?" And now the Hulk has come out. We've lost touch now with our action figures now. The heart's closing. The little Buddha has gone to sleep. And it's, "I'm going to handle this, okay?" And so I literally start going, just to get his head to bounce off the back of the seat. And then a part of me went, "What are you doing, grasshopper? Who is bothering whom?" And so rather than turn around and in loving kindness say, "Please stop doing that," I turned around and I looked at the crack between the seats. And what I saw was a woman who was having a much more difficult day than I was. Someone who was in the middle of a conflict. I could see it, I could feel it in her whole aura, her whole energy field. Whether I was imagining it or not, it was real in that moment for me.